During my tenure as a surgeon, Solange served as an emergency room nurse, effectively balancing her time between work and her travels throughout our experiences in diverse and demanding locations across Africa. We adapted to whichever roles were required at the time, including the delivery of babies, the setting of broken bones, and even the provision of assistance to the local dentist when needed. This was my second mission with her, and her third with the organization. My initial experience with Doctors Without Borders proved to be a significant challenge, both physically and mentally. I lost approximately 20 pounds, which was a considerable amount of weight for me to lose, and I struggled with depression to the point where I felt I was on the brink of losing my mind. When I finally returned home, I counted the seconds until I could collapse into my husband's arms and cry hysterically for approximately 10 minutes. I then gathered myself and embraced and kissed my then 7-year-old child. 1 year my son initially displayed a lack of emotional responsiveness, which I later attributed to his father's growing resentment over my absence. Our discussions about this were marked by tension and a lack of understanding. I was of the opinion that I was needed elsewhere, while my husband felt that I was neglecting our family. I had saved numerous lives in the field, and I believed that I was making a valuable contribution. In contrast, my husband felt that I was not doing enough at home. The bed is a secure location where one can rest without concern for being attacked. It is not an inherently dangerous place. I will be in a secure area where I can help a greater number of people than I could here. If you would like, I can provide you with statistics to support this claim. Sometimes I resented his job. He was a meticulous freelance writer who started small but now wrote for major newspapers and magazines, even winning awards with a colleague. He also launched a successful YouTube channel, gaining almost 2 million subscribers. He even contributed to CNN with light-hearted pieces. He was a prolific writer, producing heartfelt pieces that resonated with many. Our niece informed us that he had become an influencer, a term he was unfamiliar with. After conducting research, he created a video urging people to verify information and think for themselves. It took him 5 months to accept my decision to leave and another 3 months before I actually departed. He remained. I informed him that I would be returning home shortly, but his despondent gaze lingered, evoking a sense of foreboding. I cautioned him that our relationship would never be the same and that I would no longer trust him to prioritize our family. This was my final warning: should he abandon his family again, there would be no second chance. His words, delivered with a forceful intensity, struck me as he took our infant from my arms. I was sent to a rural African country that was quite underdeveloped outside of the cities. My operating room was a tent that was not securely pitched during the summer. Strong winds often disrupted operations, covering everything in dust when the tent flaps flew open. Despite these challenges, we managed to save many lives. I helped deliver 4 babies during my time there, including one for a young mother barely past puberty. After recovering, she left her baby, took her rifle, and disappeared. Rumors spread of a vengeance force and multiple angels. The insurgents subsequently departed the area after a period of 3 months. I was experiencing feelings of confinement and distress. This was my inaugural experience of sharing a room with Solange. On one occasion, I inquired of her why she appeared so serene while I was in a state of turmoil. I can attest that a remedy that fosters profound intimacy, such as an intense session that leaves one breathless with pleasure, can be beneficial. She was visibly excited and suggested that the approach might be effective for single women. I informed her that I was married. She then proceeded to show me images on her phone of 2 young girls and a handsome man. She identified this man as her husband and children. She then asked if I was sexually involved with Jean-Luc. I confirmed that I was. She then asked if he was currently available. I replied in the affirmative. She then asked if I shared a bed with Eric. I confirmed that I did. She then pointed out the lack of wedding rings on my hand. In this context, the concept of marriage is not applicable. The individuals in this setting are not married, and the activities and interactions that occur within the country are not disclosed to external parties. When an individual departs, they pledge fidelity to their spouse until their return. In my case, I have a pre-established arrangement with my husband. When I leave, I give him my rings, and he puts them back on me as soon as I return. This is a symbolic gesture of reclaiming my marital bond. It is crucial to maintain discretion and avoid any inadvertent disclosure of these activities to others. The incident occurred a couple of years ago. The medical professionals involved forgot to administer birth control. There was a subsequent shortage of contraceptive supplies. Despite attempting alternative methods of contraception, the woman discovered that she was 2 months pregnant upon returning home. Her husband discovered the truth and the couple subsequently divorced. She was subsequently remunerated to remain silent about the incident and was subsequently barred from further service. What about the potential transmission of disease? We are medical professionals, and as such, we are required to undergo regular testing. In the event of an incident, we are expected to address it promptly and effectively. I held on for 5 months, but ultimately, I lost a mother and child to, and despite my efforts, I was devastated when both my mother and child passed away. I turned to alcohol, and upon waking up next to a male nurse named Rodrigo, I initiated intimacy with him. I allowed him to stay until his rotation ended 4 days later. I was aware that my husband would likely notice something was amiss, but he was still angry about my departure. It took 4 months for me to regain his trust. Prior to re-establishing physical intimacy with my husband, I must acknowledge that numerous instances arose when I reflected on the enduring nature of Rodrigo's presence in my life or the considerable dimensions of Michelle. I attempted to suppress these recollections but occasionally resorted to the use of a toy, vocalizing their names in distress. A year later, the situation reached a state of equilibrium. I was asked to fill in for 3 months as an emergency replacement. I never informed my husband that this was due to a mortar shell. We argued for 3 days until he acquiesced, stating that I should do as I wished, but that he did not expect us to be present when I returned. I am seeking custody, as I am aware that a judge will not allow Tommy to live with you. I was taken aback by this response. The separation lasted for only 13 weeks. I attempted to reason with him, but he barely spoke to me until I left. Interestingly, he drove me to the airport. I did not do it for you, I did it for myself. Witnessing you walk away, aware of what you stand to lose, is something I need to see to get through the next few months. Things will be different. Upon your return, it would be beneficial to take your time, whether it's a month, a year, or forever. He turned away without another word, leaving me there. I knew he meant it and that if I wanted to salvage my family, I needed to act quickly. I resolved to fix things as soon as I returned and headed towards the ticket counter. Upon my arrival at the site, Salange greeted me with a hug. If possible, the situation was even more dire than the previous location. I was pleased to see you here. There is no need to unpack, we need you immediately. A mortar attack had recently occurred in a nearby village, and I was surprised at how many individuals had survived long enough to reach our location. The medical facility where my team was stationed was engaged in continuous operations for 11 hours without a respite. Approximately half of the patients who arrived at the facility survived the ordeal, which was a commendable outcome given the circumstances. 5 patients succumbed to their injuries while under my care. After the 4th patient passed away, I proceeded to the next individual in need of medical attention while the team responsible for the deceased removed the body and prepared for the next patient. One of the fatalities was a 9-year-old child. A year, the elderly woman's heart ceased functioning as she vocalized her desire for her mother. I experienced a profound emotional numbness. Salange directed me to the communal shower and assisted me in cleansing myself. Modesty rapidly dissipated in that environment. Time was limited, so both men and women utilized the shower together. After a few instances, even observing individuals engaging in intimate contact in the shower ceased to be a source of surprise. I simply relocated to the opposite side and I attempted to ignore it later. Salange climbed into the bunk with me and held me while I cried myself to sleep. By the next week, I had adjusted. We discussed our past deployments and returning home. Salange appeared happy when she mentioned reuniting with her partner and how she almost didn't join this mission. He is rapidly losing patience and I cannot blame him. He permitted me to go on 3 tours and I believe that I have reached my limit in this regard. Could you kindly inform me as to how your husband is coping with this situation? I recall that he was not pleased when I last left. He has stated that he intends to file for divorce and fight for custody, using my service against me. I hope that I will be able to repair things when I return home, but it took him a long time to forgive me last time. Do not worry unduly, my dear. It is probably his concern about your safety that is preventing him from doing so. It is likely that you will be under close scrutiny for some time, but it is probable that he will forgive you eventually. It is important not to test the boundaries of his tolerance. The organization values your contributions, but at some point, you have to consider your own needs. I hope you are correct in your assessment. I will do everything I can to make amends when I return, and I will not sign up for another tour. It is time for someone else to assume the role of hero. In recent times, she has been observed to laugh in a manner reminiscent of a schoolgirl. Gerard, a native of Ayers, is proficient in the field of medicine and possesses a number of other talents. Might I inquire as to whether you intend to become involved? I have only a few weeks remaining. I am confident that I can manage the situation. As I sat on the plane, I devised a plan. I realized that I could not return to that way of life, so I needed to convince Brian that I was over everything and ready to become a devoted wife from now on. Salange advised. She advised me to win him back through our son. Upon my return home, I discovered that he was not there. My mother was caring for our child, and she informed me that he had said it was too good an opportunity to miss and that he would be away for another 10 days. In a way, this was a blessing because it allowed me to focus on my son once I was able to win him back. Everything else would fall into place. As I planned to rebuild my family, I later discovered that Brian was in the organization's corporate offices engaging in discourse with the head psychiatrist. I extend my gratitude for your interest in our charity, Mr. Oliver. We are appreciative of any publicity we can garner, as our work is of paramount importance in providing essential services where they are most needed. However, we have regrettably lost team members over the years, which is a cause for concern. Prospective volunteers. Indeed, your organization's mission is commendable. However, the challenges you face are not fully acknowledged, and the risks are evident. It is likely that you conduct thorough assessments of volunteers' mental preparedness before they join. This is commendable, but it should be noted that the noble cause you represent can be mentally taxing. Some volunteers have experienced breakdowns due to post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD. It is evident that you prioritize the well-being of your team. It is notable that many volunteers serve multiple tours. While some do so, the organization limits it to 4 tours and generally advises against it. 2 tours is typical, with the stresses of the role often resulting in the volunteer's inability to cope while on duty. However, they support each other, which helps boost morale and ease fears. The high divorce rates among volunteers with multiple tours is a significant issue. What is the organization's perspective on this issue? The doctor paused, and some struggle with the challenges and seek solace wherever they can, often. To their detriment, we endeavor to repair relationships that have been adversely affected by the service in question. Our unsuccessful marriages and fractured relationships are regarded as acceptable sacrifices. How might one justify this to the spouses who have been left behind, uncertain about their future? I am concerned about the potential impact of these stories on the organization's reputation. My research indicates that you prefer to keep these issues quiet and out of public view. I have uncovered at least 3 instances. In instances where substantial sums were paid to avoid exposure, it is unclear whether donors are aware that their contributions are being used in this manner. The doctor stood up and stated, "I believe this discussion has reached its conclusion, Mr. Oliver. I advise you to carefully consider the implications of what you are planning to write, as careers can be ruined by spreading such allegations." The man responded with a grin that seemed to unsettle the doctor. "In my background checks, I discovered similar information," he said. "That is why I value my independence. I do not yield to pressure." He then proceeded to walk towards the door. As a precaution, it would be prudent to investigate Dr. Hope Oliver, who has a history with your organization. He exited the room, closing the door behind him. The doctor expressed his disquiet at the man's actions, which seemed to indicate a personal vendetta. Being independent meant he might be difficult to influence. He instructed his assistant to gather information on Dr. Hope Oliver. He then contacted the CEO to discuss the situation. He received a surprising phone call from the charity, and the caller was a "Hi, dear Dr. Oliver. I am contacting you urgently to request your presence at our headquarters as soon as possible. I understand that your current circumstances may present challenges, but I believe this matter requires your immediate attention. I am currently managing the care of my son full-time as my husband is away on assignment. Additionally, I have resumed my duties at the hospital with scheduled surgeries. Given these commitments, I regret that I am unable to accommodate your request at this time. I hope you will understand my position and appreciate your understanding. Sincerely. Your name. While my work was fulfilling, my primary focus has now shifted to my family. My husband was not supportive of my career, and your husband's actions could potentially damage our reputation. We are attempting to navigate this challenging situation, and it is in your best interest to come and see us. I felt a sense of dread when I learned of the situation. Brian was relentless in his pursuit of the truth. Medical professionals are prone to engaging in idle chatter, and if word got out about my overseas work, it could have adverse consequences for numerous individuals. After concluding the call, I promptly contacted Salange to relay the information I had just heard. I had commended Brian's journalistic abilities, and we even viewed a clip of him on CNN in France prior to our departure. This could prove to be a significant liability. My husband might not be easily amenable to forgiveness in this matter. It is imperative to take immediate action. It is imperative that you persuade your husband to cease and desist from his actions. Consider the potential consequences for others. Many of us are married, and this could have a ripple effect across 3 continents. Despite my repeated attempts to contact Brian, I was unable to reach him via phone or email. I was at a loss as to how to proceed. I rearranged my schedule, citing a family emergency, and flew to New York. I arrived at their headquarters by 9 o'clock. At 12 a.m., Dr. Parkins, who had evaluated me prior to my commencement of duties, greeted me at the reception area and promptly escorted me to his office. He then proceeded to inquire about my purpose for visiting. Your husband seems to exhibit anger management issues, Dr. Parkins stated. I must inquire about certain sensitive matters, and I assure you that any information disclosed here will remain confidential. It is imperative that you be forthcoming if any of us are to effectively address this situation. Are you prepared to answer some probing questions? I nodded, bracing myself for what was to come. Did you engage in intimate relations with any colleagues during your assignments? If so, with whom? Were you cautious? Did you avoid public displays? Did you discuss work matters outside the organization? I listed my 2 long-term partners and 2 others from a brief fling. Dr. Parkins remained expressionless, leaving me curious about his thoughts once I finished. I am grateful for your candor. While this is not uncommon, the rates are similar to those in healthcare outside of these intense settings. I have assisted many individuals dealing with this issue, and my advice is consistent. Follow your conscience. 95% of individuals experience a sense of conscience, and it is generally advised that they should keep such feelings secret. It is rare for a confession to have a positive outcome. After a moment of reflection, the specialist continued, however, this situation is not ordinary. Based on my conversation with your husband, I am fairly certain that he is aware of your extramarital affairs while you were abroad. It is likely that he is extremely angry. It is a well-documented fact that angry individuals do not always act rationally. In previous cases of this nature, we have been able to. It is possible to contain them, but that is unlikely to occur in this case. While we can apply pressure to CNN, we are powerless against his personal platform. He is able to be as explicit as he wishes, and there is little we can do. This could cause significant harm. It is important to consider how many spouses will remain supportive once the story is published. We need their support if you have any influence over your husband. It is crucial to use your influence now. In response to the inquiry, I must admit that I am uncertain as to the whereabouts of my husband and his current activities. He has severed all communication with me, and it is therefore difficult to ascertain his whereabouts and intentions. The situation has become increasingly worrisome, particularly given the recent revelation that the incident in question was widely publicized in the New York newspapers and has even garnered international attention. A total of 48 spouses have filed a class action lawsuit against the charity, holding it responsible for the breakdown of their marriages and long-term relationships. The lawsuit was filed internationally in courts in France, England, Italy, Algeria, the United States, and Canada. The charity attempted to reason with the plaintiff, who was determined and extremely angry and refused to cooperate. The plaintiff revealed that he had recordings of every meeting and phone call since he began investigating. He was aware that he was protected by state laws and could use the recordings in court or on his own platform. Recently, veteran spouses demanded answers from the charity. Their partners, many of whom were skeptical of the allegations, were further unsettled by the proximity of the scandal to their personal lives. There was a proliferation of sensationalist coverage, with less reputable newspapers capitalizing on the narrative of closeness and controversy. Social media users dubbed us #doctors without morals, and the mainstream media adopted this portrayal as the official narrative. Brian was positioned as the whistleblower, and my role was directly implicated. Media outlets from around the world inundated me with interview requests, which I consistently declined. I considered speaking out as a potential avenue to reach Brian, but ultimately, I did not. I was eventually afforded the opportunity to speak with him. However, he chose to ignore me and instead spend the majority of his time with our son. When I inquired about the best way to contact him in case of an emergency, he provided me with a disposable phone number. He stated that he would dispose of the number if I called for anything other than to collect our son. The first time he came to pick up Tommy from my mother's house, I waited for him on the steps. I attempted to initiate a conversation with him, stating, "Brian, we need to talk. I need to explain things and help you understand what happened." I attempted to clarify that our lives were not affected by the situation overseas and that it held no significance for us. I returned home and he regarded me for a moment. "I would like to pose a question to you while you were engaged in pleasant activities elsewhere. Have you ever considered how your actions might affect our marriage? Would you be willing to forgive me if I engaged in multiple affairs while you were away, claiming that they meant nothing because you were not present?" This line of questioning is unproductive. I would like to bring Tommy out so that I can leave. Your continued silence is uncooperative. After that, he ceased communication with me. If I attempted to speak with him, he would simply stare until our son emerged. Tommy was now residing with his father full-time. The court subsequently determined that he should remain in the residence, citing its familiarity and comfort. Additionally, the judge permitted him to reside in our house until the matter was resolved, as he served as the primary caregiver. I leased a modest apartment in the vicinity of the hospital. It was a simple dwelling, starkly contrasting with the house we had purchased 5 years prior, which boasted a spacious yard. Brian's reduced workload allowed him to become a part-time stay-at-home father. Brian, the primary caregiver, worked during Tommy's naps and later when he was in school. He redesigned the backyard, adding a fence, sandbox, swing set, and a large above-ground pool where they spent many summer hours. I used the pool only twice in 5 years. On one occasion, I returned home to find 3 girls frolicking in the pool. I was displeased, but Brian smiled at me. I still have to work, as I could probably work at night while Brian took care of Tommy. However, I am unsure if I should return home to the demands of a 6-year-old. After a long day, this arrangement is preferable. Kimberly is highly qualified as a childcare provider, so I hired her. The other 2 are just friends. The employment agreement included the use of the pool a couple of days a week, with a limit of 2 friends at a time, and no boys. Tommy loves her, she is very good with him, and I am able to work. She never enters the pool while on the job, except when assisting Tommy in swimming lessons. This does not seem ideal. I understood his perspective, yet I still found it troubling. You are comfortable working with girls in close proximity. I am uncertain what you have been reading in my office, which is situated across the house. I might catch a glimpse if I stand up to look out the window. I am compelled to occupy my time at my desk and strain to look out the window. Otherwise, I come out here like I am now to inform them that it is getting late and that they need to go home. Tommy woke up from his nap and ran into my arms. He then pulled me over to meet the girls so that I could meet Miss Kimmy. As I talked with them, I started to relax. When Kim told me that she was starting a nursing program in the fall, I found myself at ease. In the fall, we discovered common ground. I assisted her in obtaining a volunteer position at the hospital and provided her with guidance and support to the best of my abilities, even writing her a strong recommendation letter for college. Kim was thriving in her 2nd year, and her younger sister, Alexis, affectionately known as Miss Lexi, was taking over, and Tommy was showing a great deal of affection towards her, almost on par with his love for Kim. I sensed that they were providing a considerable amount of care while I was away. The charity was interested in settling the class action lawsuit with a non-disclosure agreement. A disclosure agreement was presented, and I was informed of the status of the ongoing negotiations. Brian's laughter was perceived as inappropriate by the opposing counsel. All other parties have reached an agreement, therefore, I am compelled to do so as well. One of the attorneys inquired as to whether I had resolved my issues. I have resolved my issues, Brian replied, but I have not forgiven her or your organization. I am aware of the efforts made to recruit her. He assured her that it would be a positive addition to her resume and potentially lead to consulting opportunities in the future. I am still in the process of investigating and attempting to comprehend the manner in which you operate in other cases. In some instances, the victims were compensated with money, while in others, they were offered business deals. I have no need for monetary compensation, and I would never engage in such an arrangement. I am currently engaged in my second investigation of this organization, and I have set my own deadline for completion. I request that you allow me the necessary time and space to conduct my research. As they were about to leave, the youngest lawyer, a woman who had graduated from law school 3 years ago, posed a question to him: "Is your anger misplaced? After all, it was your wife who caused this, she cheated on you. I understand and I'm sorry. Shouldn't you be making her life a living hell instead of ours?" He smiled at her, which unsettled her. Then he showed her a picture of his son. "This is my son, he's the reason I haven't completely retaliated against her. My wife, had she not been present, I would have unleashed my full fury on her immediately after she returned from her last trip. Perhaps my anger is misdirected, but over the years your organization must have been aware of these occurrences. You even have protocols in place regarding how to handle a spouse's anger. You calculated the impact on your organization and decided that some collateral damage was acceptable. That was true until I came along. I must be your organization's worst nightmare. I have my own income, so you cannot threaten my job. I earn enough money to ensure that you cannot financially ruin me. Furthermore, I have sufficient resources to withstand any potential consequences." His veiled threats were met with a display of rage that was ignored. As she walked away, her pale complexion indicated that she was unsettled by the intense anger emanating from the man. It was therefore unsurprising when the divorce papers arrived. Every legal step taken resulted in frustration. A point was made of visiting his house. He frequently obtained a restraining order against me, citing the potential for arrest if I came within 100 yards of him or his house. My employers expressed concern about the disruption my personal life was causing, despite no evidence of wrongdoing at work. The administrator called me in for a meeting. I am speaking on behalf of the board. Personal issues are becoming a distraction. You are held in high regard as a skilled surgeon. This is not an official request, it is merely a suggestion that you attempt to calm the situation with your husband. Sarah, I promise to try my best. Despite being unable to speak with him directly, he indicated that I could email if necessary. That night, I spent approximately 5 hours crafting an email. After sending it, I hoped for a response before going to bed. The following morning, I was disconcerted by his reply. He indicated that he was indifferent to my career or the hospital unless it affected our son. If I had lied, he requested that I retract it. He also mentioned several individuals from the hospital. The hospital has been engaged in missions for the organization. I will investigate whether your actions are in alignment with the organization's interests. However, this did not provide a solution. I presented the email to the administrator, who expressed concern and took a firm stance. This is a critical issue. I will involve the relevant individuals and issue a warning. However, there is a risk of creating tension with those with whom you work closely. Patient care is of the utmost importance, so I advise you to complete the day's tasks and then take a week off to address this challenge. I wish you the best of luck. The message was clear: either resolve this issue or begin searching for a new hospital. My supervisor conducted interviews and I received some intriguing phone calls. 3 technicians, 2 nurses and a doctor had become romantically involved while on a mission. 2 of them were in relationships and brought their affairs home with them. Consequently, 6 individuals were confronted with a challenging decision: should they confess and hope for forgiveness, or should they remain silent and deny everything? It is my hope that they all chose to remain silent, as if one of them had confessed, it could have led to a chain reaction. I learned of these events later, at a time when I was focused on a mission of my own. I had my lawyer request a meeting with Brian's lawyer. If they agreed, I would sign the divorce papers I had finally accepted. I was surprised when they agreed, as I had assumed that my marriage was beyond repair, especially when only one person was willing to try. Brian published a harsh essay criticizing doctors and their God-complex 3 days before our scheduled meeting. He had done thorough research and consulted experts, making his points accurate. A noted psychologist mentioned that this complex was present in almost all successful people to some extent, regardless of their profession. However, it was more pronounced in medicine due to the life-and-death nature of the work. Brian discussed how this sense of entitlement could affect behavior. This prompted me to engage in a period of profound introspection. I observed a striking resemblance between my own conduct and the assertions presented in the essay. Had I truly become as arrogant as the essay suggested? Did I believe that my profession exempted me from the constraints of normal rules? Had I justified my actions by compartmentalizing my life? I found that the answer to all these questions was affirmative. I was frustrated during those missions. I could have chosen not to have close relationships with anyone, or I could have chosen to remain at home. I convinced myself that it was merely a way to relieve stress and that it would not affect my marriage. I believed that I deserved it to maintain my mental health and that what happened away from home would not. After further reflection, I came to understand that I had missed the excitement of new partners and that I might have engaged in infidelity again if I had been presented with the opportunity and felt secure. This was a stark reminder of the necessity for vigilance. The meeting proceeded more smoothly than anticipated, with a few minor issues requiring prompt attention. Brian was granted primary custody of our son, which was already the established arrangement. However, I was granted generous visitation rights. Our incomes were comparable, and thus, neither of us would be responsible for alimony payments. Instead, I agreed to contribute to a college fund for our son. Overall, the agreement was equitable. Brian desired to retain ownership of the house, and thus, instead of selling him my share, I transferred ownership to him and suggested he put the money he would have paid me into our son's college fund. He appreciated that gesture, particularly in light of the fact that I had been a good partner despite our arguments. We had always been able to resolve our differences and never fought in front of our child. However, that changed when I decided to go on those missions. My therapist, who was helping me avoid repeating mistakes in future relationships, helped me realize that I had started focusing on myself rather than being part of a couple. Brian was not without flaws. He could be distant and moody, particularly when he was upset about something. However, he attempted to maintain control. Prior to my first mission, he fully supported my career. However, after I returned, he seemed indifferent. If I had a conflict in my schedule, it was no longer his concern. At this point, he sensed that our relationship was deteriorating. He began protecting himself. Once the legal formalities were completed and the lawyers departed, we sat down in the conference room and had a real conversation. This was the first time we had done so since before my first mission. It struck me that a considerable amount of time had elapsed since we had engaged in such a discussion. This would be the final occasion on which I would offer an apology to you, Brian. In retrospect, I regret ever boarding that aircraft. At the time, I was singularly focused on my own needs and entitled to do so. I now recognize that I made decisions without adequately considering your perspective and the impact on our son. Regrettably, these were decisions that I made without your input. I now make the decision to move forward without either of you. While we may have chosen to end our marriage, we still have our son, who will remain a constant in our lives for at least the next 15 years, through college and beyond. We will continue to be a part of each other's lives through the weddings we plan and the arguments we have over grandchildren. His words brought a smile to my face. Despite the tears, the overwhelming emotion made it difficult to speak. I gave Brian what would probably be our final kiss and left. It is unclear whether the divorce or our conversation eased his mind, but he did ease up on his involvement with the organization. I know they settled the class action lawsuit for a considerable sum, which significantly boosted Tommy's college fund. The stress became too much, so I switched hospitals and moved across town to our biggest competitor. Management said the right things, but I could tell they were relieved I was leaving. Some of the people who had been on past missions had marital issues, but fortunately only one of the marriages ended in divorce, although a few other relationships experienced difficulties. I did not date for almost a year after my divorce. When I did begin dating again, I was cautious and did not enter into a serious relationship for another year. That relationship ended when I discovered that my partner did not want children and could not tolerate being around them. Another year and a half elapsed before I encountered romantic interest. My partner was also a physician, specializing in pediatrics. He held a profound affection for children. We proceeded at a deliberate pace, cognizant of the fact that both of us had recently undergone divorces. This cautious approach proved beneficial, as it afforded us the opportunity to gain a profound understanding of one another. Prior to entering a committed relationship, Brian maintained his single status. However, he was involved with a producer from CNN, with whom he was developing a serious relationship. Tommy held positive sentiments towards her, and she had 2 young daughters who adored him when they were together. The network was encouraging Brian to commit exclusively to them. However, he was not enthusiastic about this prospect. I was aware that if they did not adopt a more conciliatory approach, he would terminate his contract in 4 months. MSNBC and Fox were both attempting to persuade him to join their networks, which would ensure his continued presence on television for the foreseeable future. One afternoon, I was passing through the neighborhood and decided to see if Tommy would accompany me to the local ice cream parlor. The establishment in question was a modest shop that produced its own ice cream. While the selection was not extensive, it included a dozen flavors that changed with the seasons. The proprietor utilized local fruit whenever feasible, and peach season was my favorite time of year. I would bring a small cooler and stock up on quarts of peach ice cream whenever I visited. Upon entering the driveway, I observed Brian's vehicle, but I was already signaling to indicate my presence. Tommy immediately noticed me and proceeded to run off the front porch, accompanied by 2 young companions. Brian and Alicia were situated on the swing, and they reciprocated my gesture of greeting with a wave. I proceeded to embrace Tommy and then the diminutive 4-year-old. The girl, aged 1 year, opened her arms for a hug. I was presented with the option of backing away, but instead I smiled and embraced her, along with her 6-year-old sister. Once I had finished, the younger child remained in my arms, so I carried her with me. Brian had a slight grin on his face, while Alicia seemed unsure of what to say. "Hello," I said. "I'm Sarah. Let's make a deal. I'll trade you a 10-year-old. The boy appeared to have been used previously, perhaps even by these children. I might even offer him a pony." Alicia smiled, and I wondered if she would accept. "I am Martha, but I am called Marty. Sarah is my name, but I am not sure what it is called in less polite settings. It rhymes with which Sarah, I believe." I hugged Tommy again and said I had to leave. "I had just happened to be passing by and thought about getting ice cream, but I see you are busy. We can do it another time." I had forgotten I still had the 4-year-old. The infant was placed in my arms and began to pull on my hair. In order to ascertain whether she desired ice cream, it would be necessary to consult with her mother. I attempted to place her down, but she resisted. She continued to vocalize her desire for ice cream. It appeared that I was unable to disengage her from my person. "Marty, perhaps we should proceed to procure ice cream. There is a highly regarded establishment just down the street that offers an array of homemade flavors. The current season for peaches is particularly favorable, and this is my preferred flavor. I am willing to pay for this indulgence." Marty smiled and rose to his feet, bestowing a brief kiss on Brianna's. "I will be back in approximately 45 minutes. Please prepare everything for the grill." We decided to walk, and the sight of Brian with his mouth hanging open made me smile as we headed to the shop. Taylor clung tightly to me, reminding me of the considerable effort it takes to carry a young child. We warned them to behave or they would not receive any ice cream, and they complied. Taylor changed her mind several times before settling on. Tanya considered all the flavors of ice cream before selecting the blueberry flavor. I selected the peach flavor, and after the server provided her with a sample, Marty also selected the peach flavor. Tommy was familiar with all the flavors and chose vanilla. The girls tasted everyone else's choices and determined that the peach flavor was particularly enjoyable and would be their selection next time. Despite the circumstances, the children were remarkably well behaved and kept their surroundings relatively tidy. Overall, it was a cheerful group of children. Upon returning, Marty carried Taylor, despite her objections. Tanya held my hand firmly when we arrived. I informed them that I had to leave and received affectionate kisses and a warm embrace from my son before departing. Marty seemed like a suitable match for Brian, who had always desired more children. It appeared that he was advancing in life. Marty contacted me unexpectedly, requesting a lunch meeting. I considered the request for a moment, aware that she wished to discuss Brian. Eventually, I made up my mind. I informed her that I would be available at the hospital around noon. We agreed to eat in the cafeteria, despite the food there being of a surprisingly high quality. I was agreeable to this arrangement. I arrived at noon. Marty was much smaller than me but exuded the confident manner of someone successful in her field. We selected our food and sat down, engaging in small talk as we ate. She then pushed her tray away, grinning at Brian and me. I wanted to inform you in person that you are getting married. It is not my intention to make you feel uncomfortable by discussing your past, but you are still connected to him through Tommy. I believe it would be beneficial for us to talk in person if you are comfortable. Could you please share with me what went wrong in your marriage? I know Brian can become absorbed in his work at times, but he is a kind man. I am grateful for my years of therapy. I will be honest with you now. In summary, I began to perceive myself as more significant than Brian. While I held great respect for his professional achievements, I felt that my role as a physician was of paramount importance. This led to a sense of arrogance, as Brian preferred a more domestic lifestyle. I, on the other hand, enjoyed socializing and the attention that my appearance and abilities brought. I began to make decisions independently, operating under the assumption that I possessed superior knowledge. In matters pertaining to our family, I became increasingly self-centered, focusing on my own desires rather than considering the broader implications for our household. In hindsight, I recognize that I made numerous missteps, particularly in my professional conduct as a medical practitioner. My decision to pursue international opportunities proved to be the final straw in my marriage. Despite Brian's explicit warning that he would leave me if I went, I was determined to prove my worth and win him back. As we all know, things did not work out in the end. If I could go back, I would probably change things knowing what I know now. However, I would not have been able to maintain the relationship in the long term. Ultimately, I made the decision to leave, aware of the potential consequences. I had engaged in extramarital relationships while away and expected everything to be fine upon my return. However, this was not the case. My actions had a significant impact on my self-esteem. She regarded me with a gaze that seemed to convey a multitude of emotions. After a moment of silent contemplation, she let out a sigh. She proceeded to share her own experiences, stating that she had encountered similar situations before, though not on a personal level. She had worked with numerous individuals who exhibited similar traits. I have encountered individuals with such profiles and personalities and have experienced their arrogance firsthand. One such individual even demanded favors right before going on air. I was in his office at the time and he dropped his pants, saying nothing. He then proceeded to describe how a good BJ would relax him on screen. I found this amusing and began to imagine the scene. I then proceeded to grab his and pull hard, which resulted in him screaming like a child. I then brought him to his knees and leaned in close, whispering, "If you ever try this again with me or any other woman here, I will finish what I started. I'll finish what I started." He nodded weakly. Just as he thought I would release him, I pulled down harder and slapped him across the face. The red mark remained for hours. They had to find someone else to host the show. Management threatened me, but I had recorded the entire incident. I informed them that if it affected my career, I would sell the story to their largest competitor. 6 months later, they did not renew his contract. She glanced. She then observed her nails, displaying a grin as she looked back up at me. This illustrates my comprehension of the characteristics associated with a God complex. Furthermore, I am aware of effective strategies for navigating interactions with individuals exhibiting such tendencies and for handling those whom I am unable to avoid. I am gratified that you have recognized the value in learning from past experiences and regret that your actions ultimately resulted in a divorce. However, I am also pleased that it led to the emergence of a relationship with the man I consider to be my ideal partner. Do you find this perspective understandable? I conveyed the conversation to my new partner that evening while we prepared dinner together. That evening, my partner and I cooked dinner together. This had become our routine. If one of us arrived home much earlier than the other, we might cook alone, but we preferred preparing meals together. This was our way of unwinding, discussing our days, and letting go of the stress from work. This left us time for important activities like cuddling while watching movies or listening to music. If we wanted, we could simply cuddle. The pediatrician's relationship with me ended abruptly after I discovered disturbing content on his laptop. My own laptop had crashed, so I used his to send an urgent email about a surgical procedure. I opened a folder named Sarah, expecting to find personal photographs, but instead found numerous images of myself, primarily without clothing. Some images were taken while I was asleep, but the majority depicted intimate moments. The images had been captured using multiple cameras. Additionally, the collection included images of the subject in the shower and using the bathroom. Upon discovering a folder labeled Candyland, I found more disturbing and explicit material. I barely made it to the kitchen sink before vomiting. After rinsing my mouth and brushing my teeth, I immediately took the laptop to the nearest police station. 2 detectives, one male and one female, were assigned to the case. After a brief examination of the files, the district attorney took the matter seriously and interrupted his dinner to hear my report. He instructed me to return the laptop to the pediatrician's house while they obtained a search warrant. On my way back, I called to report what I had found. When I returned to his house, the district attorney was anxiously pacing. He noticed his laptop in my hands and realized what I had discovered. He reacted with great violence, striking me with such force that my nose was broken and I lost consciousness. This occurred just as someone rang the doorbell. He then fled through the rear door, grasping his laptop, but was met by 2 hefty policemen, both of whom were married with children. They interpreted his attempt to flee as resisting arrest and took immediate action, leaving him with significant injuries. After the trial concluded, he was sentenced to 15 years. A year after his incarceration, evidence emerged that he had been grooming one of his patients. This resulted in a lawsuit by the girl's parents that stripped him of his assets, leaving him impoverished in prison. This is a common fate for juvenile offenders. He suffered significant injuries within his first year, including blindness in one eye and a lasting limp. I subsequently returned to my therapist, grappling with the realization that I could not have foreseen his crimes. He had never indicated any inappropriate behavior with minors, aside from expressing a desire to have children of his own someday. His words had previously given me hope, but now I shuddered at the memory. He appeared to be successful, and he hid it well for years. My therapist consoled me, and everyone was shocked when the truth came out. Perhaps it was a matter of fate or divine intervention. The intervention led you to discover that there are many good men out there. One day, one will find you. I am sure of it. I had a good man once. I reflected sadly on this and ruined it. Perhaps being single now is my penance for my mistakes. 9 months later, I met Jeremiah. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with a captivating smile. His eyes were the kindest I had ever seen. He had a touch of grey in his temples and beard, but the strength in his muscles belied his age. I encountered him at a convention sent by my hospital for networking and recruitment purposes. My troubled past had receded, and I had made significant contributions to my new workplace, earning recognition as one of their notable figures in the community. While the criteria for job applications typically considered various factors, nothing was set in stone initially. The objective was to attract fresh talent at 35. I was the youngest surgeon on staff, and the hospital was eager for new perspectives. The symposium covered a wide range of medical topics, and I decided to look up Jeremiah. I was astonished to discover that he was the proprietor of an insurance company specializing in healthcare, a certified public accountant and a registered nurse practitioner. He held 5 degrees in different fields and had an exceptionally high IQ. His workshop on malpractice initially caused considerable concern, but he was able to guide us through the steps to avoid lawsuits in a clear and humorous manner. He was adept at providing levity to ease the atmosphere, yet his concluding remarks commanded the audience's undivided attention. Errors occur when individuals fail to acknowledge them. Attempting to conceal mistakes only exacerbates the situation when the truth inevitably emerges. This not only damages one's reputation but also fosters a perception of doctors as unscrupulous and inept among the general public. A movement to cap malpractice awards has emerged, and I have assisted in developing a complex algorithm that some states are considering. Until then, it is important to remember that the worse your behavior, the bigger the payout. I will be available for questions throughout the remainder of the conference. His talk received a great deal of positive feedback, and doctors were eager to engage with him, forming a line that extended 3 people deep. I eventually ceased attempting to interact with him. I excused myself from the proceedings and proceeded to my next seminar. I did not encounter him again until later that night when I entered an unoccupied conference room to avoid another physician who had consumed a considerable quantity of alcohol and was behaving in a manner that was inappropriate and unprofessional. I was compelled to conceal myself or risk engaging in physical contact with him, which would have been disadvantageous for business. I was on the verge of doing so. When Jeremiah's voice broke the silence, I recognized him. I smiled, but I was only able to muster one. I was afraid, and he was the one I needed to interact with. I needed a break from the time doctors spend in school. Some are surprisingly clueless about the real world. You don't have to tell me that as a doctor, I've made my fair share of dumb decisions. However, I'm proud to say that none of them involved. A patient, then, is at an advantage. We conversed amicably for the next 15 minutes. Suddenly, the door swung open, and there he was, Dr. Dick. "What are you up to?" I inquired. "I was just about to have some fun with this guy," I joked, "but you've disrupted the flow of the interaction." "Please leave," I implored. We were getting to the good part. He swayed a bit, attempting to process my words. He was about to respond when Jeremiah stood up, looming over him. "If you wish to remain, you may observe. However, you may find the experience more enjoyable if I attend to this woman." Dr. Dick opened and closed his mouth a few times, mumbled something under his breath, and then departed. Jeremiah and I observed the interaction. We gazed at each other and burst into laughter. Once we had settled down, we resumed our conversation, sticking to safe topics. When we said goodbye, I gave him a kiss on the cheek, and he hugged me warmly. The following morning, we encountered each other at breakfast. He gestured for me to join him, and we agreed to have lunch after our respective seminars and workshops. We also arranged to have dinner. The evening was agreeable. He escorted me to a tranquil restaurant situated at a distance from the conference proceedings. Subsequent to this, we proceeded to a convivial club where the music was not excessively loud, and we engaged in a few slow dances. Despite my height, I felt diminutive and at ease in his embrace. Upon our return to the hotel, he accompanied me to my room and bestowed upon me a tender kiss. It was not overly passionate, yet imbued with a sense of promise. It left me with a longing for more. As our relationship developed, we discovered that we were both from the same city. He had been married previously but had tragically lost his wife during childbirth due to an unknown condition. They had miraculously saved the baby, who spent almost 2 months in the hospital and was now 7 years old. Approximately 3 months into our relationship, after we became intimate, I shared my narrative of this relationship begins with a description of the initial encounter. He listened attentively, holding me while I wept, afraid that he might want to terminate the relationship. His response was profoundly moving. He acknowledged that the past could not be changed, that I had made mistakes, but that I had learned from them. He asserted that if I did not trust him, we would not be where we are now. I attempted to shower him with affection, but he was not receptive. Fortunately, the weekend progressed without incident, and by its conclusion, he was visibly fatigued. We proceeded to take a measured pace in our relationship, and I began spending increasing amounts of time at his residence. I was overcome with nervousness when I introduced him to my son, but they concealed their feelings immediately. Jerry was highly proficient in archery, and he piqued Tommy's interest in the sport after conversing with my former spouse. My husband did not elaborate on the specifics of their encounter. However, he did convey that the individual in question appeared to be a commendable person. One day, I returned home to discover the residence filled with children. Tommy and his 2 younger sisters were present, along with Brian and Marty, who had a child together. The latter bore a striking resemblance to an exceptionally intelligent and mature young girl. Over the course of the following years, I observed that Jerry blushed slightly and arched an eyebrow before grinning. We were managing this group for a couple of days while Marty departed for New York to accept an award. Her career was advancing rapidly now that she was the executive producer of Brian's new show. CNN had convinced Brian to host a 1-hour show 3 days a week, alternating with another show. The program was broadcast for 1 hour, 3 days a week, alternating with another show. Its ratings were solid and improving. During negotiations, the only request made by Marty was that his wife manage the show, and the network agreed immediately. Marty's performance was so exceptional that the program won an Emmy Award. Brian was visibly proud of his wife, and even he spoke passionately about how much he loved her on one of his shows, which caused her considerable embarrassment. I was compelled to watch his show and experienced a pang of regret when I realized that if circumstances had been different and I had remained faithful and controlled my ego, he might have praised me on air. I found myself pondering whether Jerry was the person I was destined to be with all along. 2 days turned into 3 when they requested an additional day. Jerry was delighted when the older girls expressed interest in trying out Terry's bow. However, he was a teenager and the bow was too large for them. Jerry addressed this issue by they were taken to the academy, where they were provided with smaller bows and all the necessary gear. Taylor demonstrated an aptitude for archery, as did Tanya. Lucy, Jerry's daughter, was a valuable assistant. Tina expressed interest in a bow, and I intervened, procuring one of the toy bows with suction cups instead of arrows. She exhibited a surprising level of proficiency for a 3-year-old. In the following year, despite my initial regret, I came to accept my decision when I was compelled to remove an arrow from the TV screen, the patio door, or a car window. My husband and children found this amusing, while I experienced a complex emotional state, initially characterized by exhaustion and joy. My daughter Lucy was initially reluctant to share her father with others, but over time, she became more accepting. I became close to her, and we formed a strong bond. I was able to express the love I had not been able to give to my son through my relationship with her. She thrived having girls her age around for days, and there were frequent displays of affection. We were relaxing on the couch when Lucy crawled on top of us. After settling in, she said, I was taken aback when Lucy inquired about having a younger sibling. This was the first instance she had referred to me as Mom, and I was overwhelmed with emotion as I embraced her. When I was able to speak, I kissed her on the head. She then asked, "What does Daddy think about that?" My husband was grinning and holding up a small box. My father was particularly enthusiastic, declaring it to be the best idea he had heard in a long time. I wept for approximately half an hour, embracing and kissing both of them continuously. I had previously considered the idea of having a child to be implausible, given my age. However, through sheer determination, I gave birth to an 8B boy 2 weeks before my 38th birthday. The waiting room was filled to capacity. I had a favorable impression of the doctor and the nurses. It was not unexpected that Marty and their children would be present, but I was surprised to see Brian's mother. She had relocated for a period of time, and I was unaware of her return. As she inquired about holding her newest granddaughter, I observed tears welling up in her eyes. Jeremiah's mother and she were engaged in a lengthy discussion, planning for the future. Of all the children, Lucy was the first to hold her brother after her parents. Initially, she was disappointed that he was a boy. However, this sentiment changed as soon as she saw his face when he was 5 and she was 13. If he became fussy, she would scoop him up and cover him in kisses. He would giggle and try to wipe them off as quickly as she planted them on him. The largest photograph on her nightstand is one of her holding her brother for the first time. She was 53 years old, the respected elder of the surgical unit, unaware that her hands would soon be unable to perform the duties of her job. She began planning her retirement. Younger doctors and nurses saw her as a mother figure and often confided in her. One of the nurses she was regarded as one of the more attractive individuals and sought my counsel. I learned that she had worked with doctors internationally and had been offered an opportunity to join. I inquired as to whether she had any advice. I was forthcoming in sharing my personal experiences and the sacrifices that I had made. She was recently married, so I inquired as to whether her husband was supportive of the idea. He was not yet aware of her decision. In that case, it would be advisable to discuss it with him. Are you prepared to be separated from him for an extended period of time? He was patient, waiting for a return. The organization does important work, but there are always drawbacks and sacrifices. She should think carefully before deciding. Ultimately, she decided not to go, and someone else took her place. She broke up with her boyfriend before leaving, but he was engaged by the time she returned, shattering any hopes of reconciliation. We suspected she might have ended things preemptively, perhaps anticipating the possibility of engaging in an adulterous relationship while away was a remote one. However, we were unprepared for the speed with which he moved on. She appeared subdued for approximately 4 months. When they offered her another assignment, she declined. Tommy graduated with a master's in journalism and took a job as an associate producer for Fox. Lucy was a junior in a pre-med program. Tanya is in the same program and they are roommates. Taylor is a senior and has a full-ride scholarship for Tina, a freshman in high school, appears to be majoring in boys at the early age of 14. She appears to be as mature as a 20-year-old, and both men and boys alike are infatuated with her. She has a good head on her shoulders, and if they persist, she shows them pictures of herself and her siblings, including her brother and cousins, all holding ribbons and trophies for archery and karate. Tommy was an alternate for the Olympic team last year, and JJ is already a second. At the age of 15, Lucy attained the rank of state champion in archery for her age group, narrowly defeating her cousin Taylor. Tommy obtained a master's degree in journalism and commenced employment as an assistant producer at Fox. Lucy was a third-year pre-med student, while her roommate Tanya was also enrolled in the same program. Taylor, a fourth-year student, had secured a full scholarship. For volleyball, Tina, a high school freshman, appeared to be more preoccupied with boys than with the sport itself. Despite her apparent interest, she was grounded and, if anyone made any advances, she would show them photographs of herself with her siblings, cousins Lucy and JJ, all holding trophies from their achievements in archery and karate. Tommy narrowly missed making the Olympic team last year, while 15-year-old JJ had already achieved considerable success in these fields. The second-year student, JJ, is already in possession of a second Lucy, who had achieved a degree black belt, had won the state archery championship for her age group 2 years ago, having narrowly beaten her cousin Taylor. One day, I encountered Brian at a coffee shop and we proceeded to engage in conversation. I once again expressed my remorse for my actions, but he dismissed it, stating that it was in the past and that we should move on. Instead, we spent the next 30 minutes joking about our children and spouses. We then shared a brief kiss before parting ways. As I observed him walking away down the sidewalk, I reflected on the adage that those who cheat never prosper. In my case, however, I knew this was not entirely accurate. I had indeed engaged in wrongdoing, driven by arrogance and a sense of entitlement. I endured significant consequences for a considerable period. Nevertheless, I believe that the pain I experienced ultimately led to personal growth. I hoped that my personal growth would be reflected in my marriage and relationships with those I cared about. When I mentored younger people at work, I shared my story with the intention of making a positive impact. As I touched the envelope in my pocket, I smiled. It was my present to my husband for our upcoming anniversary, a 2-week stay at an exclusive resort in Thailand. There would be sun, sand, and the option to go without. Despite the deterioration of my physical condition, I continued to engage in regular exercise and was regarded as one of the most attractive mothers at my hospital. Jeremiah still perceived me as a young woman with a high level of physical attractiveness, and I hoped that this perception would remain unchanged over time. Consequently, I endeavored to persevere through the challenges and to avoid dwelling on the impact of time and natural processes on my appearance, particularly given that a degree of this aging was a consequence of my relationship with him.